Let's talk. We've been beating up on the Republicans. Let's talk about our Team Blue friends for just a second, though, because they've got superstar problems of their own. Because, and let's just be honest, since Obama, they really keep looking for that one person and they can't find them. And they had an interesting thing in Congress this week where mayoral candidate Mamdani came down
Yes.
and did the tour. And you saw this and you covered it and you talked about it at The Independent. We will link to it. And that's the term you used, yet another superstar candidate. Now, we're getting ahead of ourselves on this because they still got to have an election. And the polling is, he's not blowing them away. He's the front runner. He's the leader, but it's not done by anything. What do you do with something like that? Because I've kind of been the skeptical on one, like he's running against Andrew Cuomo, who's on a power trip that vaguely has ever been seen before in electoral politics. So you got to factor that part of it in. The Adams stuff with Trump, you got to factor that in. There's a lot going on here environmentally. But once again, you have a superstar donor-based internet candidate, and they do the congressional tour, and you see kind of the more sober people, Hakeem Jeffries hedging his bets, a couple of the other people, and they're like, man, I got to do this dance, but I know in my head I got to kind of be careful with this. Has the party just not figured out how to do superstars in the digital age because their donor base and the media folks that they work with are so ingrained on the online stuff? But I think they're starting to learn the lesson that there's a line there somewhere. They just can't find it. Talk about him coming to Congress this week, because I thought it was a fascinating Rorschach test on where the party is heading into this midterm and how they're going to deal, because they're going to have a lot of superstar progressive candidates that are going to get real popular that won't be popular in wide swaths of the country. They got to learn how to handle this.
Great question. And it was funny because like the day that Zohran came to the Hill, I was seeing Jamie Raskin and Pramila Jayapal walk out from votes, and I overheard Jamie Raskin saying, "Did you see Mamdani?" Like, and it was kind of like, teenagers saying, "Did you see the Beatles?" Or modern day for those youngins. Did you see Taylor Swift? But like, I mean, I think it was like he was a superstar for them. But then, folks like Laura Gillen, who represents a district just outside of New York City, out on Long Island, she has to create some distance for herself. Tom Suozzi, who represents part of Queens, but also a large part of Long Island, and his district broke for Donald Trump. He's kind of said, yeah, Mamdani's a warning to us that moderates like myself haven't done a good job of, making the case in the Democratic Party, but also he's just way too extreme for me. And I think that it really is. It was funny because like I talked about this with Liam Kerr over at Welcome Pack, and he was saying that it's really hard because like he admitted, and Liam's a moderator, he's like, Mamdani is cool, and it's hard to distance yourself from cool, especially when young folk like him, especially when Latinos broke for him. If you look at the Latino areas of New York City during the primary, he cleaned house. These are Democrat and Asian Americans. These are demographics that the Democrats have been losing under Trump. So there's a temptation there, but at the same time, look, you got to still be able to win in places like Nebraska's second. You still got to be able to win in Kansas's third district. You still got to be able to hold your seats in North Carolina, like Don Davis's district in the Black Belt of North Carolina. And so it's simultaneously, how do you get, and again, look, for the love of God, it was a primary, it was a ranked choice primary in a municipal election where you had, Andrew Cuomo, who, to borrow from our good friend Curtis Lewa, was slapping fannies and killing grannies. I love that so much. And you had Eric Adams, who is, I think it's fair to say he's corrupt. Literally, my friends and I had a poll
Just
on when he was
my
friends and I, we literally had a poll when he was going to get indicted, and I'm surprised it took this long. But I think it's a mistake to think that he's a superstar just because he won with all these circumstances. Credit to him for taking advantage of those in a way that the other candidates didn't in New York, because it was just such a clown car primary. But still, you have to take those things into account, and you have to take into account the fact that look, Democrats need to hold seats in Senate seats like places in Georgia. They need to flip a Senate seat in North Carolina. We can talk about North Carolina in a bit in our buddy Tom Tillis. And then you also, if you're reaching, you got to kind of hope that you can be competitive enough and get a moderate enough candidate to win in Texas if Ken Paxton wins the nomination. And you also have to take into account you got to kind of think about beating Susan Collins. To say nothing of Jared Golden winning in Maine's 2nd district, to say nothing about holding Senate seats in New Hampshire, in Michigan, in Minnesota. So it is a balancing act. And I think the other thing is that for better or for worse, there has yet to be a very compelling moderate candidate who excites people as much as Zohran or AOC did. There was a great graph that was circulating on social media last week that showed the biggest recipient of donor money on the Republican side was Young Kim, who represents my former congresswoman. I mean, the congresswoman from my home district, California's 40th district. But the biggest fundraisers on the Democratic side are folks like Jasmine Crockett, AOC, and all those other ones. So Republicans, what was the old saying? Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line. It's changed a little bit under the Trump era, but when it comes to donor money, Republican donors still fall in line, and Democratic donors still donate with their hearts.
Let's back up for just a second, because I'm just amazed how fast people's memories. Did people already forget the knock down the house incident? And for those of you that were born yesterday and don't remember, Knock Down the House was the documentary. AOC is the famous one that came out of that. That's before she was a congresswoman. She was, and I'm going to read it right from the bio here. It says, a young bartender from the Bronx. That's how she was pitched. A coal miner's daughter in West Virginia, a grieving mother in Nevada. We all know who that one is, buddy. And a registered nurse in Missouri. Build a movement. Well, here's the thing is, we're down the road now. AOC has learned to play the game, and it's not that she's sold out or whatever. Y'all can debate that if you want to. She's smart enough to know, well, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and I'm going to get along with Nancy Pelosi, and I'm going to win this seat a couple of times. And the coal miner's daughter in West Virginia, that's Swearinger, she lost 2 straight elections by over 40 points. And AOC is pretty much the only one that's got any real power and political future going right now. We see this cycle over and over again, but we don't remember the recent history of how these things work. Is like, yeah, it gets exciting, but these things have kind of limited shelf lives, and you might get one person out of it. And if they're going to have a long career, they're probably going to moderate at least a little bit enough to play the game. And that's why you got AOC now in position to maybe go for a higher office at some point, and the rest of them have kind of dissipated.
Yeah, I mean, and also take into account that two of the squad members, Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush, lost their primaries.
Their primaries. That's the whole key. Not the general election. They lost primaries.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of it, you could say it was their stance on Palestine. Well, AOC has basically the same stance on Palestine and Israel. So, like, it was just the fact that, Bowman, he embarrassed himself on multiple occasions. Bush just never went back to the district. She was under federal investigation. So take that into account. And then, say what you will about Rashida Tlaib. I know a lot of people don't like her. A lot of people like her, but she's a former state senator. She knows how to take care of her district. And, your constituency services will get answered if you call Rashida Tlaib's the district office. But the point being is, as you said, doing these kinds of things, doing these kind of primary challenges, especially against entrenched incumbents, they are high risk, high reward. Ruben Gallego got a little bit lucky that Kyrsten Sinema quit the Democratic Party before he announced his candidacy against her. For the Senate race in Arizona, and then Sinema just kind of up and retired. And then he was running against Carrie Lake. So take that. And then Ruben's also moved to the center, to your point about being a power broker. That's why he's going to be in Iowa next month, folks. And nobody goes to Iowa on accident. But you're right. I mean, and I think that's one of the things to take into account is that at the end of the day, the Democratic base is still fairly the base of the Democratic Party is still fairly moderate, and especially as if you look at where the early primary voting states are, they're all in the South, and we know that older Black voters who are the most consistent Democratic primary voters tend to skew more moderate. And so they, at the end of the day, you still got to be able to win over those types of voters. And that was the issue that Bernie Sanders had when he lost South Carolina, is he didn't even bother to make the call to Jim Clyburn. And I think that at the end of the day, you still have to take it, like progressives still need to learn how to play by the old rules. And credit to AOC, she's actually moved the needle a little bit. And, I know a lot of people actually weren't happy about her not getting oversight, but she actually won the war, because guess what she's on now? She's on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which is much more influential and much more powerful. If she plays her cards right, she could either run for Schumer's seat, or in 10 years down the road, she could be chairwoman of the Energy and Commerce Committee.
Yeah, if I was advising AOC, I would actually tell her to stay in the House for a couple of reasons. One is there's so much churn now. You don't have to wait 15, 20 years to get the committee room. She's in line for them now. And she's not only in line for them, but she has the national following and the fundraising and stuff to actually, how do I say this gently? The way those sorts of things work, she's in a position now, she has enough stroke and background to actually get it done. Is that, I'm just laying it out fairly. Let's be adults here. She had a lot of rep. Now she's got enough heft behind the rep to actually get some stuff done. She really could be the next Pelosi, and I don't mean that she's going to be the Speaker of the House necessarily. I mean as far as an influential liberal figure for the next 20 years. I would actually advise her to do that, because the way the House is churning out for the next 10 to 15 years, the way it's looking, she's probably going to be able to be a power broker for the Democratic Party. And you could argue she would have more power in that role than she ever would running for a Senate seat that's going to be really iffy, even in New York State, excuse me. Yeah. Even in New York State, that's going to be an iffy proposition. I don't think the presidential thing's ever going to happen. If I was advising her, she could be tremendously influential for the next 20 years, right where she's at.
And if you go to the Senate, you're just automatically in the back of the line, just by, if you went for Senate, just because of the way the Senate is. If you think the House is hung up on seniority, good God, the Senate is even more hung up on seniority. So, and to the point, let's just be real. Let's be adults here. The Democratic
Party ain't going to be a Joe Manchin. She's not going to be that kind of a Joe Manchin, Christine Sinema. That's not what she's going to be. Yeah. So if you're not going to be that, and you're not going to risk the wrath of your own party, you're one of 45 to 50 votes all the time. That's just the reality over there.
Yeah. So, and let's be adults here. The Democratic Party is just older now. So there's going to be a lot of retirements coming in the next few years, either retirements or debts. Let's just be honest, because we're all adults here.
Man, we're having 2 or 3 of those a year, but we'll talk about that some other. You just touched on it, so I want to bring it up. Look, my political background, I come from the land of the Blue Dog Democrats that are now extinct. And by the old Blue Dogs were working class, but decently, a little bit of disposable income, socially conservative, governmental wise, a little more liberal. They liked their welfare programs, but they wanted the government to leave them alone with their guns. That kind of white working class Blue Dog Democrat, that's pretty much extinct now, because it all went Trumpian and the rest of them left. The moderating force in the Democratic Party traditionally has been the black vote, which is not that it's not progressive, but it's a little bit more broad than people give it credit for. And that's how you got Joe Biden.
Yes.
The Hispanic vote is starting to fracture into that, but it's a lot more diverse and it's growing a lot faster. So it's not quite as moderating, but it is to some extent compared to the white, well-educated progressive wing of the party, which is sprinting left as fast as they can.
The yuppies.
The yuppie larva, Rush used to call them, which is still a great explainer. Yeah. You just were talking about this on Twitter, and I want to extrapolate it for a second. The highly educated, mostly affluent, let's say middle to upper middle class and up, white women, is the demographic that has really moved politically in this country.
Yes.
Those used to be the swing voters. That's who Karl Rove made his money with going after, with college-educated suburban white soccer moms.
Yes.
They're trending more progressive now. And you were just talking about this. This is one of those demographic shifts that aren't getting talked about, but the Democratic Party is going heavy on these folks because it fits right into a lot of their, I'll just call it priors for lack of a better term. Yeah. It fits right into what they want. but it's a powerful demographic that's also pretty electorally narrow. And you were talking about it, and I want to give you a minute to extrapolate it out because I think it's a really important development.
It is an incredibly important development. To your point, Karl Rove made his money off it. James Carville made his money off it. The whole talk about the soccer mom vote in the 1990s. There's a reason why New Jersey went from being a swing state to a solid blue state in the 1990s. People is because of soccer moms. And suburban educated women. And I think what you're seeing, my roommate Pablo Manriquez, you should be following him, Pablo Reports, he calls the Olivia Rodrigo and her mom vote. These are, I love Pablo for that. But he was right. We were talking about it in the case of Dobbs, and he was right about that. But the thing to take into account is that these are women with disposable income, college degrees. They are much more likely to delay. The one thing that gets in my craw all the time is, for all the talk that J.D. Vance makes about childless cat ladies, they are much more likely to get married than women without college degrees. But it's just that they delay getting married and they want to have somebody who's on their level. But even then, they're open to marrying men without degrees. So there are women who are. And as you said, they're much more socially progressive, oftentimes much more progressive on race than even Black people are. And they are much more socially progressive when it comes to abortion rights, LGBTQ rights. A lot of them, I talk about this a lot of time, and there really does need to be some sociological studies about the Sandy Hook effect, which really turned them into some of the biggest voters when it comes to gun control. The idea that it was not just that gun violence was not just something that happened in the inner cities, but could happen in a lily white area of Connecticut. I think that was really a very catalyzing force for them. And then you've got Dobbs, and then you've got Trump, which just supercharged both these trends. And I think that, as I've said multiple times, it's very powerful, and it'll win them House districts in places like Georgia, places like Arizona. You could argue that Joe Biden won Arizona in 2020 because of these types of voters. You could argue that places like Orange County, which, like, my goodness, I was looking at Orange County during the 2024 election. I was just like, wait, is this the Orange County I grew up with? This is Reagan country. My dad lives in Orange County, for context, folks. And the suburbs of Atlanta and the suburbs of Raleigh. Suburbs of Raleigh are a little interesting. We can go into that. Suburbs of New Jersey. But the difficulty with it is that there is a trade-off, right? Because when you get those districts, those kind of suburban districts, you do ultimately kind of lose some of the working class districts who might be a little more socially conservative, for lack of a better term, might be more supportive of gun rights, but at the same time might be more supportive of labor, and might be more supportive of healthcare benefits, welfare benefits, and unions. So again, it is very much a trade-off, and I think that Democrats need to think about, is this is this trade-off worth it? Because one of the trends that was so interesting to me, and it was the one that I looked at the most, was that, we talk a lot about Latino men and machismo and all that. In the past 12 years, Democrats actually lost more with Latinas than they did with Latino men. And one of the only groups that moved left in 2024 was white women with degrees. So, Democrats need to take into account, but simply, just to be completely blunt, there aren't enough of those voters to win. That's just the God's honest truth. The median voter is no longer a soccer mom. It is a small business owner who is likely Asian American or Latino.